In this video, we're going to talk about rewriting from log form to exponential form and from exponential form to log form. Before we do that, let's talk about some commonly used notation. We have two logs that we use the most. One is called the common log and one is called the natural log. The common log is a log with a base of 10. Instead of writing log base 10 where you actually see the 10, how you're typically going to see this written is the word log without a base. There is an implied base. Alright, sort of like this, so let's recall something. When we were talking about square roots and cube roots, we have that radical symbol, cube root, fourth root, and so on. When we see that radical symbol without a number, do you remember what was the implied number that was there? Right? It was a 2. Right? Now we typically don't write the 2, and on your calculator you didn't see the 2, but it was implied. So we can think square root of 2 with the 2 there, we can think of that. But when we actually go and write this, we do not write the 2. So you can think the square root of 2 with the 2 there, but the way that you write it is always the radical symbol without the 2. And that's what we do here in the case of the common log. You can think log base 10 with the 10 there, but how you write it is log without the base 10. So that's an implied base 10. The natural log, something similar. Log with the base of e, we don't write it like that. We think of it like this, but we actually write it as ln. That means log natural, or natural log. I think it's something that came from France. So log natural, ln. We think log base e, but we write ln. If you look on any calculator, and for our purposes we can pull up Desmos, so DESMOS, I'm going to click Start Graphing. If you go to the keyboard, or the keypad, and click on Functions, go over to Miscellaneous, and you're going to see ln, that is the log-based e, and then you're going to see log, that's log, that's an implied log-based 10. So these two on your calculator are the two that we're talking about. This is the common log, and this is log-based e. This is how you see them written. Okay, so you need to know when you see ln that that's log-based e, and you need to know when you see log without a number at the bottom right that that's an implied base 10. Okay. Alright, so the purpose of this particular video is to talk about switching between what we call logarithmic form and exponential form. There are three pieces that get moved around between these two different forms. One of them is the base. So the base of the log is always that number that's at the bottom right, sometimes implied, sometimes explicitly given, but that base is always there. The base of an exponential form is here. It's what that exponent is attached to. It's always right in front of the exponent. So both forms have this base. Both of them have an exponent. For the log form, the exponent is the number that comes on the other side of the equal sign. This is the output for the log. For the exponential form, the exponent is that number that's at the top right of the base. So that small, tiny number to the top right of the base. The input of the log is here. That's what's inside of the parentheses that comes after the word log. For the exponential form, this quantity is going to appear to the right of the equal sign. So equals the input of the log. So our goal in this video is to work on going back and forth between these two different forms. Okay, so these forms are actually equivalent forms. They actually mean the same thing, but sometimes rewriting it in a different form helps us solve the problem a little bit easier. Alright, so let's talk about how we're actually going to do this. Our first example is working on changing from logarithmic form to exponential form. When we're in log form, you're going to see the word log. If you do not see the word log, then you're not in log form. So in order to be in log form, you have to see the word log. So this example is asking us to switch, starting in log form, switch to exponential form. So that means we want to rewrite each of these expressions as the base raised to the exponent is equal to the input of the log. Okay, so this is a really important concept, and we're going to use this concept again in later videos. So take a minute, make sure you're really paying attention to what we're doing here. Our goal here is to rewrite each of these equations from log form, this is what they're currently in, to exponential form. Okay? In order to do that, we're going to identify the three moving pieces. We're going to identify the base, we are going to identify the exponent, and we are going to identify what is the input of the log. So the first thing, I'm going to write these three words down, and I'm going to start to identify them. Alright, so looking at part A, what is the base of the log? Well, the base of the log is always the little number that's at the bottom right of the word log. And for this example, that is 5. Okay, now two of these things are always really easy to identify. The other one is just whatever happens to be left over. The next thing that's actually pretty easy to identify is the input of the log. The input of the log is what comes right after the word log. So the input here is x. Okay, now the only thing we haven't identified then is the exponent. Well, the exponent is the only thing that's left over. The only quantity left over that we haven't identified yet is the 2. So the 2 is the exponent. For log form, the exponent is always what's on the other side of the equal sign. Okay, now once we identify those three pieces, we're going to put them in a different order. We're going to put them in what we call the exponential form. Now the exponential form, remember, is the base raised to the exponent power is equal to the input of the log. So the base is 5. Take that base, write it big. Put the exponent back on the base as that tiny number to the upper right equals the input of the log. So all we're doing is rewriting in a different form. So here's the exponent, here's the base, and here's the input of the log. So our goal is to identify those three moving parts and put them in a different order. Alright, so let's look at example B. We want to identify the three moving parts: the base, the exponent, input of the log. Alright, the base here is the little number that's at the bottom right of the word log. Now, in this case, that is not a number, that's a letter B. We'll just write B. The input of the log, well, that's 64. And the exponent is whatever's on the other side of the equal sign of the word log, so that is 3. So our exponential form would be to take the base, write it big. So there's our B. Put the exponent back on that base as a small number to the upper right of the base, is equal to the input of the log, which is 64. Okay, part C. We're going to do the same thing. we're going to switch from log form to exponential form. So you just want to take a minute and write down the three moving parts: the base, the exponent, and the input of log. What's the base of this log? Well, the small number to the bottom right of the word log is 3. That's the base of the log. What's the exponent? Say, I'm not sure yet. Okay, well, what's the input of the log? Well, the input of the log is what comes right after the word log, right? So that's 7. The only thing left over that we haven't identified is the y. The exponent is always what's on the other side of that equal sign. So 2 of those are typically really easy to identify. And once you identify 2 of them, then the third one is just whatever's left over. So the exponential form, take the base, write it big, 3. Put the exponent as a small, tiny number to the upper right of the base, equals the input of the log, which is 7. Okay. Now, our goal is not to worry about anything after that. At this stage, we just want to convert from one form to the other and leave it as it is. Don't do anything else. Just rearrange from log form to exponential form. Okay, we're going to talk about how this becomes useful later on. All right. Now we're going to do the opposite. So in this case, for all 3 of these, we are given the exponential form. So that's what we're given, and we're asked to convert to the log form. So what we want is to have the word log. So log form means you have the word log. We're going to have a base to the bottom right. We'll have the input of the log. And then what comes out the other side is the exponent. Okay. So for each one of these things, we're going to identify again the 3 moving parts. So we're given exponential form. We want to identify the base, the exponent, and the input of the log. Now typically 2 of these things are easy. The other one is just whatever's left over. What's the exponent? Let's start there. The exponent is typically the easiest thing to identify in the exponential form because the exponent is always that tiny little number that's at the upper right of some other number. So the exponent here is 2. What's the base? Well, the base is whatever that exponent applies to, whatever's directly in front of that base, and that's the 12. Those 2 things are typically the easiest to identify in exponential form. What's the input of the log? You say, that's weird, there's no input, there's no log. Well, to identify the input of the log, it's just going to be the piece left over that we haven't identified yet. So in this case, the only thing we haven't identified is the x, and that's going to be considered to be the input of the log. All right, so once we identify those 3 moving parts, we're going to say, well, what's the log form? Well, we're going to write the word log, because log form has the word log. We're going to put the base to the bottom right of the word log. The input of the log, x, is going to go inside, and that's going to be equal to the exponent, which is 2. So the base is the small number to the right of the word log, so you do have to put the word log yourself. If you don't have the word log, you're not in log form. The input of the log, x, and the exponent there is 2. Alright, so here we are in exponential form, and we're asked to convert to log form. So we're going to identify the 3 moving parts. Alright, what's the base? What's the exponent? What's the input of the log? So the exponent might be the easiest thing to start with. It's the small, tiny number to the upper right of something else, so that would be 3. What is directly in front of that exponent will be the base, so that's b. And the last thing is the input of the log. might be hard to figure out, okay, what's that? Well, you've already identified this as the base and this is the exponent, so the only thing left over that you haven't identified yet is 8. So that must be the input of the log. Okay, put a box around this just so we remember that's our final answer. What's the log form of this? Okay, the log form, we have to write the word log. Okay, we're going to put a base. The base was b, a little tiny b to the bottom right of the word log. The input of the log is 8, is equal to the exponent, which is 3. That would be our final answer. Okay, so in your homework, you're going to be asked to convert from log form to exponential form and from exponential form to log form. It's a really nice skill to have. We'll talk about later why this skill is so important, but it will come up in later videos, so you want to make sure that you're practicing with this idea before you move on to another video. All right, last one, part C. We want to change this from exponential form to log form. We're going to identify the 3 moving parts. What's the base? What's the exponent? What's the input of the log? All right, exponent for this, usually the easiest to identify. It's the small tiny thing that's at the upper right of something else. So that's y. The base would be e. And then the only thing we haven't identified yet is the 9, so that's the input of the log. So we want to rewrite this in log form. Now I'm going to do something, and I want to kind of make sure that we know that this is not our final answer. We'll talk about why. But we want to write the word log. What's the base? We said e. What's the input? Input of the log is 9. And the exponent is the y value that comes out on the other side. Now, I'm not going to put a box around this answer. Why am I not going to stop here and put a box around this as my answer? Well, one of the things that we just talked about at the very top of the page, and we'll scoot back up, is that you're allowed to think log-based e, but you write ln. This is how we are going to write our final answer. Log-based e is fine. It's not a stopping point, though. You don't know. Every time you write log-based e, you want to convert that back as your final answer to ln. That's what your homework is going to do. That's what everybody does when they write log-based e, they write ln. So we're not going to stop there. So really important, I'm going to put a couple of stars by that. Okay, you don't want to stop there. You want to write ln, log-based e, ln. So it's ln, or natural log of 9 equals y. And that is our final answer. Okay, so you can think this, but your final answer should always be written as ln. So we can think log-based e, but if you think log-based e, you should be writing ln, or natural log.